So, Tim Matthews, welcome. Thanks for giving me some of your time. Tim, you and I go back a long way, don't we? 15, 16 years when we met in London at All Saints Peckham before either of us were ordained, but we've kept in touch and our paths have crossed.
Tim, good old Peckham days.
Peckham days, before Peckham was cool. It was cool before it was cool. Yeah. Tim, why don't you just quickly give us a bit of an intro to you guys, your context, what you're up to.
Well, I'm married to Debbie. We've got 3 young-ish kids, and we're in Bournemouth, and we run St Swithin's and St Clement's churches in Bournemouth together, sort of known as Lovechurch Bournemouth. And we planted out from HTB down here in 2014, and kind of since that point, it's kind of blown up, and lots of amazing things have gone on, and we've had a lot of fun as it goes. But we miss you, Rich. I look back to those Peckham days with a lot of love.
We did have a lot of fun, I do remember. We should try and get together post-lockdown. It'd be fun, wouldn't it? Is it true that you guys are 3 streets from the beach?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I just walked down the beach this morning to pray a bit and try and process what's going on. I feel a bit lower this week. I think we've had quite high energy running through the initial stages of this thing.
Yeah.
But I think this week it's hit me a bit more. So actually it was a very strong wind this morning. So I could sort of kid myself that my eyes were watery because of the wind, not because I was weeping, saying, "Oh Lord, what's going on?"
Well, we feel a bit the same, actually. It's interesting, isn't it? I think the adrenaline rush of that kicked in as we scrambled to move church online and adopt new things is kind of waning, and now it's like, how do we keep going? So we're in it together. Excuse me, Tim. What I'd love is for you just to share what your sense is of what God is doing in and through this whole pandemic. How do you make sense of it?
Oh, well, I'm really not sure. There's a couple of things. I mean, obviously Easter occurring in the middle of it was, I think, quite profound for many believers all around the world. And it certainly was for us, where the sufferings of Christ and the sufferings of his church took on a whole new sort of level. It was really, I had just finished an Alpha course, and my Alpha group was obviously full of questions about human suffering, as they always are, but particularly heightened now. And to end that course by focusing again on Jesus, who we believe in a suffering savior. One is not that God's immune from all this. And so I think somewhere in the midst of all this is a restoration of the true Jesus and a view again of the true Jesus. And actually, if I'm really honest, I slightly believe that somewhere in the midst of this is kind of the restoration of a true church as well. It's amazing to see the way that the church has responded, not just church here in Bournemouth, but around the place. In a way, we've always said, for years, we've all said, oh, the church isn't the buildings, it's the people. But actually, when you take buildings out of the mix and you take the mass gatherings that we've spent so much time and energy trying to, get people to come along to mass assemblies, when those two are stripped away, the church has focused again on small gatherings in people's homes. I know they've been occurring over Zoom and whatever, but it's the small gatherings that aren't led by, the institution or the ordained leaders. Have got nothing to do with it. It's just the church meeting at grassroots levels, and the whole love your neighbour aspect of it has been the immediate outworking, picking up supplies for your next door neighbour, praying for your next door neighbour. So I think there's been a restoration of the divinity of Christ, the true divinity of an incarnate Christ. And I think there's been the restoration of a spirit-filled church actually doing the gospel in crystal clear ways, at cost, at something of risk to themselves, in order to show God's love to others. So I don't think God caused it. It's one of those things of him working all things together for the good of those who love him and according to his purposes. But I mean, yeah, I think that the Holy Spirit's doing plenty in this, as well as suffering alongside people who are suffering. Of course, there is very, very real suffering going on, but it seems to me that people have a sense that Jesus is suffering alongside them, not far off and distant and having forgotten them. So yeah, I don't know. It's my thoughts.
I know it's really helpful. I think just on the suffering part, I think there's a sense for me in which a lot of it is we're seeing what Jesus has always been like, but we're no longer as inoculated from perhaps the reality of things. You know, often sickness, disease, and they're somewhere else, aren't they? They're in another part of the world, but all of a sudden it's this country and it's our neighbourhood and everyone's affected, and that we become much more attuned and to the kind of the reality of everything, I think, and the starkness of it, which is actually often the case for most people. I camped out a couple of nights ago in the garden, and just was overwhelmed by, you could hear the birds singing all night, and it's like, oh, they always do that. It's just that normally I'm inside, you know. And the other thing that struck me in all of this, I don't know if you saw Pope Francis's Easter message, where he sat on his own in the middle of the square in the night time, and he said, "This is nighttime. We're in nighttime," and it's so profound, that sense in which we're kind of feeling something of the reality of the mess of the world and the pain of the world in a way that we're too busy normally. We just crash through to Easter Sunday, don't we? And chocolate. So there's a real invitation, I think, isn't there, for the church to kind of inhabit that space.
There is.
What do you think the people of God should be like seeking to do and seeking to become in this time? Because we were just chatting before we recorded. There's a sense, isn't there, of needing to inhabit the moment, but at the same time be letting God prepare us for whatever lies, so that we can continue to be the kind of church He needs and wants. What are you?
I don't think we should be in any hurry to want to go back to normal, whatever normal was. I, for one, I don't really want to go back to a lot of what normal was. There was a lot that was broken. There was a lot that was divisive in our society. There was huge distance between people, even when there wasn't social distance. You know, there's a great irony, isn't there, at the moment, that just as you said, people feel more unified and closer to one another, even when they're not actually physically close. It's kind of increased all those other senses. Not for everyone, I know. I'm not trying to decry the real sense of loneliness and isolation that people have, but there is that sense of having been unified. I don't want to go back to being divided and distant socially. And, you know, the other thing you highlight there is the environmental impact. And we're beginning to think about this in a way as a bit of a precursor to the larger emergency that's slower, the onset's slower, but the larger emergency that is accelerating towards us of climate change. And it's been amazing watching the reaction, as it were, of nature to this crisis. And again, I don't want to go back to our practices that dismantle and destroy creation. You know, these amazing pictures of formerly polluted cities where you can now see the Himalayas and whatever. Well, who wants to go back to smog? No one wants. Why would you want to do that? And so I think allowing this thing to reset our sense of what's normal, our sense of what we're hoping for and aiming for, I think is really important. And we're certainly trying to think about that and plan for that down here. You know, I think another good example is the church working in partnership across cities and towns all across, and villages all across our nation, Because when it comes right down to it, and people are dying and people are in need, actually people stop caring about the boundaries that we normally care about. Who cares about style of worship when your Catholic neighbor needs some toilet roll picking up? Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Just go and pick up the toilet roll.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go back to the world where the church kind of goes, oh, okay, everything's reset now, everything's normal, we can get back to the way we were, all in our own little individual ruts, living as though we don't need to be in relationship with all these other churches in order to address the greatest challenges of our time. I don't want to go back to that world.
Yeah.
And I think, right down here in Bournemouth, I hope the Spirit's doing that, using what the devil intended for harm, using it for good. And I love that scripture, where Joseph's brothers, where he could have taken revenge, and he doesn't, because he says to his brothers, no, what evil intended for harm, the Lord has brought about for good. And I kind of get that sense that there's a lot of good going on underneath the surface suffering, which is real and does need addressing. But I sense that the Lord will be advancing his church through this, as he always does.
Yeah. That's so helpful, and I totally agree with you. One of my observations has been that both within the church and more general society, people haven't thought long and hard about a lot of things. They've just gone with their instinctive reactions and just got on with stuff, and not worried about upsetting, the normal protocols. Or we've just had to adapt, haven't we, quite quickly? And I think that's been great. There's been a decisiveness in the church, and as you say, not worrying about boundaries or styles, or just cracking on with it. And that agility and flexibility, and that kind of, is actually what I've realized is it is in us. There is this innate instinct in us, but there's always these kind of social norms or institutional processes or whatever they are that kind of in normal time kind of almost suppress that instinct. Well, they've had to go, and people have just pushed past that because needs must. And actually in that those things have emerged these beautiful things like the neighborhood WhatsApp groups, or someone was talking to me yesterday saying that what he's been doing, he works with our food bank. He said to everyone in his street, why don't we, as part of the NHS clap, why don't you bring out your food donations to the food bank, and at the end of the clap, I'll just come around and pick them all up, take them to the food bank on Friday. Like, it's genius. And suddenly he was like, we never knew each other, we never did anything like that together. And the question they're now having is, how do we, as you say, I said earlier, not go back to normal? How do we throw a street party and kind of almost make this like something that isn't just for a season but becomes our new normal?
Absolutely. And Rich, the other thing is that you and I are church planters, kind of entrepreneurial, like all that stuff. But when you look at it objectively, what's just happened in the church in the UK is church planting on a scale that no one could have imagined. Basically, nearly every church has planted online.
Yeah.
And we knew, I remember countless meetings here previously about, how do we reach, because we know that most people are now online, and how do we reach them? And meetings going back and forth for like 3 years. Well, in 3 weeks, in 3 days, we had to just cut through all that and just do it. And that's the story right across the nation, right across the world. And certainly we here in the home church here, there's been so many good things that this crisis has forced us to get going, that we're not looking to stop those at all. We're looking, even if the lockdown restrictions ease and everything, we're going to continue those. And not just, a rubbish version of what you could be getting if you turned up, but actually a really great version in and of themselves that if online is where you want to do church and that works for you and your family or, you know, your situation, obviously there's some people in vulnerable categories who are going to be self-isolating for a very long time. Maybe until there's a vaccine available or something, I don't know. But we're looking, even when the lockdown restrictions have ended, we're looking to continue a whole load of that thing. So in our Sunday services, you know, normally, like most churches, we have like a Sunday service meeting, which for us, we normally have 6 services on a Sunday across the 2 different sites. So we, you know, you have the service pastor around the table from each of the services with the kids and youth and worship and all the other guys. Well, we're going to put a new service pastor who's the online service pastor. In fact, yesterday there was a question saying, well, we've got one online service at the moment. What's to stop us? Why don't we launch another and do something on like Sunday evenings or midweek that's on a new online service, because the other one's kind of getting old now. I mean, that's like, and you think like, oh my goodness, I don't know, but I mean, okay, we could try doing that. We could try. I mean, what's to stop us? No, nothing. And what's the cost of doing it? Well, there isn't really much. So why don't we give it a go? Yeah. So all that good stuff, I think, is very exciting. I mean, we've just seen the church in the UK plant, I don't know, how many online services have started up over the last couple of months? I don't know, rough estimate, let's say 5,000, could be more. Yeah. Probably is more, 10,000. Well, why don't all those continue? Because they're all church plants.
I think that's totally right. And Paul Harcourt, who leads New Wine, as you know, Paul, he has this great phrase about what of the new normal or the current new do we want to baptize as a gift from God in the church? And I think it's a great phrase. And you're right. We've been talking about moving online for a while. This kind of forced us to do it. The other thing at our end that's been fascinating that kind of falls in the category of we will keep doing this is that the first thing we did was we got people to commit to praying twice a day together if they wanted to on YouTube. So we have a sort of very light touch morning prayer, 11 to 11:20, and then a bit more liturgical night prayer, 10 o'clock, deliberately at the same time as the news, to sort of say we're going to kind of give you an alternative to the angst-induced. Like, why would you watch the news? It was the last thing you do at the end of the day in a global pandemic, you know? And the numbers of people engaging with that has stayed really high. And it's become part of our kind of corporate rule of life, if you like, as a church, that I can't imagine not doing anymore. But if I'd said a month ago, hey, what about doing this together on YouTube? They would have been like, what? No chance. So it's really interesting, isn't it? You said earlier about...
Rich, I'd be interested...
Go on.
Well, Rich, just on that, I'd be interested to, you know, I've heard a lot of churches, and certainly we've had the conversations here about what is success with online services, because it's easy to, you know, get the stats off Facebook or your YouTube channel or whatever that show engagement with it. Yeah. But I think we do need to do some deeper thinking about what does discipleship really mean in a largely online world. You know, there are some deeper questions to be asked there, but it's strong beginnings. I agree.
Well, I think you're right, and we're asking the same question: what are our new metrics? Because for me, I'm like, you can have, doesn't matter how many views you've got. You know, I viewed church broadcasts; they're great, but like that's not going to my stat isn't going to help you, is it? So, it's new territory for us. There is something, isn't there, about and in the same way that, you know, we would often think, okay, someone might turn up on a Sunday, great, but we want them to move into community and we want them to sign up for Alpha or join a life group or get plugged in somewhere. I guess there's a parallel online of, okay, how do we help people move from watching a broadcast to engaging with us beyond the broadcast? Yeah. It's new territory for us. But people are watching. I mean, you've got a massive heart for evangelism. It must excite you to think there are all these people who are. It's never been easier to try church, has it? You know, and
absolutely. I mean, we're just about to launch Alpha. Yeah. And normally the summer term Alpha courses, I'm sure you've had the same. You know, a kind of smaller, still worthwhile, absolutely, but they're smaller and a little bit maybe lower energy. It's hard to get people off the beach here. Whereas now, all the alpha groups are going to be online. They're going to be occurring at different times in the week, and what's happened is the bar to accessing church, which despite all our efforts was, all the cafes, all the nice lighting, all the whatever, is still quite high in the UK to, accessing church. Now, what's just happened is that bar has just dropped through the floor. Now you can go to church in your PJs with a coffee and your own coffee and toast in hand. You haven't had to leave your front door. And actually you can. What we found is the Holy Spirit is encountering people through that. You can worship like that. And I think for a lot of people are thinking, well, that's easy. I just went to church. I didn't really mean to do that. Which is a great thing. I think, Rich, if I may, I do think for all the good, we've just talked about the great things and the opportunities. I do think there are two massive challenges coming, at least as a result of this epidemic, that I think are going to be very significant and very severe, possibly. One is the psychological, social challenge of the impacts of all this on mental health and relationships. I think, I pray that doesn't occur, but depending on how long it goes on, I think could be very severe. And I guess it's the church that's going to be more at the front lines in dealing with that stuff. Whereas, when it's physical health, thank the Lord, we've got the NHS. I think with the other stuff, we're going to be much more closely involved. And then the second thing is the economic impact. And, I think we've got to pray about those, like pray our socks off about those, and also prepare as well. And they're two, quite big questions that we're thinking about and trying to prepare for.
I think that's so right, and we've had similar conversations here. We had an evening on Zoom, like everything is on Monday, with lots of our leaders. And one of the things Kath, my wife, was saying is that part of the call on the church is almost certainly going to be way more sacrificial than we have been. We think, don't we, about giving up a coffee a week to support a charity or something. This might be give up your holiday territory, or not upgrade your car territory, so that we can make sure that people have the care they need. We run Worcester Food Bank, and it's been extraordinary watching the way our church has responded to the immediate kind of need to keep that open. And again, I think that desire is in there, but we've needed this kind of reality check and this rawness and stripping away so much to kind of help us, in a sense, see what really matters. And my hope is that on the caring for people, being generous and sacrificial, that will flow out of this season. On the helping people navigate trauma, which is what it is, I certainly feel the church is. I think we've been catching up, and we've got the likes of Will van der Hart, haven't we, and Kate Middleton and others who've been really helping us get up to speed on that. But I think that's a massive conversation for us to be having, I think, now, so that then, whenever then is, we're not kind of trying to have it then. It's too late. We need to be ready for helping people, our own people, as well as then others. And I don't know whether you've got any insight on how you think you guys might do that, but it's something I think we'll have to learn together on.
Well, what we're trying to do is, the barrier to entry on accessing stuff has fallen. I think too, the barrier to leading stuff within the church has fallen, because more people are taking ownership to just lead within their street setting than ever before. And I think that's, such a great thing. Content, there's so much good content out there. So actually take a home group or a connect group or a whatever you call it, a discipleship community that is the basic building block of the church and has been since the beginning. you know, the barrier to leading one of those was quite onerous in a way, for all our efforts to try and take the burden of leading a home group off of our lay leaders, off of our congregations. Still, it was quite a big ask. Now, not so much.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to work at deploying, mobilizing, equipping a whole new bunch of leaders. It's the same with Alpha, with leading an Alpha group. You say about people who've got their little neighborhood WhatsApp groups. Well, any Christian who is on one of those groups could offer to run an Alpha group for them and just offer it. You don't need any qualification. You don't need any. We can package up the material. You just say, here's the link, watch this, and then let's have a Zoom to chat it over. I mean, it's pretty much that's it. And there's a little training video that you can watch, and so I think that's going to be a big thing of, and I love that, and I know you love that too. Yeah. That part of what this is doing is kind of resetting what the role of the church leader is. Back to being a pastor and a developer of people, a coach of people, rather than the sort of CEO, sort of operationally focused leader, that's expected to know how to fix the photocopier as well as run a funeral. And yeah. Maybe I'm being naive, but I rather like that resetting of priorities that's going on within leaders, back over to prayer, back over to really pastoring, feeding, protecting our flocks, developing people, and caring for the poor and ensuring that the church is mobilized towards the poor and all of that stuff. I think that's quite exciting as well. So I think the more we can do to mobilize a wider group of leadership within the church, I think is part of the future for sure. And giving creative autonomy to those who are skilled for this time. Yeah. There's a lot of people in our churches who are much better equipped for this time than the church leader is. That's certainly true here.
Oh, and here, for sure. Yeah.
It's some of those guys, oh, great, yeah, do it. what do you need from me in order to do that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we've had similar conversations, and I think it is exciting. And I think, there's a real, I think, I'm always thinking, what should I be doing? Can I be doing in this time to help get our people through this? But so that Mark Sayers has this great phrase about we've got to come back stronger, as the church. How do we? I'm trying to pastor people through it, and let people live in the moment. That we had a great conversation as a staff team yesterday about, how do we engage with lament and grief? We don't like our society, do we? We try to kind of inoculate ourselves from it, but actually this is a time to inhabit Easter Saturday stuff, and at the same time be making sure that we are leading people through this in such a way that they emerge with a humble but confident kind of trust in Jesus that allows us to be good news to the world when it's going to wake up and go, where are we? What the heck? As well as being confident telling the story of God, which makes sense of what we're experiencing. And I don't know a better story. And one of the things I've been trying to do is put language to what people are experiencing and sensing and naming. And actually going first as the one that says, hey, here's how I need to change as the leader. And here's how I think we're going to need to change as the congregation, because going back to our friend Jim McNeish, that there's loads of rackets that can be played all the time if we're not careful between leaders and congregations. It's a chance to get rid of a whole load of those as well and go, hey, my role is this, your role is this. We talked about that, but now we've actually experienced it for several months. And isn't it life-giving? Hasn't it simplified things? Hasn't it got us, as you say, back on track with what really matters? How do we own that and move that forward in such a way that it is our ongoing experience. You guys have, I'm conscious we need to finish in a minute, but you've been thinking a bit about an exit strategy. Maybe finally, if you could just say a little bit, perhaps to a church leader who will be listening to this, watching this, what sort of questions have you been asking as a church now so that your exit strategy is ready? How have you gone about doing that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a big question, but we have revised our whole church strategy in the light of all this. I love, there's a quote from Brené Brown that is, we will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Yeah. Our pre-COVID existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, yeah, one that fits all of humanity and nature. And when Debs, my wife, showed me that, I thought, that is so good. This is an opportunity. That's and it. We do need to rewrite our strategies because of, economically, apart from anything else, but also to address these challenges, to address the difficulty, the suffering that is going on, as well as to move the church forward. So we're not referring to it as an exit strategy, because I don't think COVID-19 is like something we've gone into and then we'll exit out of. I think it's something that we're trying to think more about leading into it and through it. Yeah. To a sort of new reality that will be the other side of it, rather than returning to something that was. And our thinking, Rich, has been informed a little bit by the disaster relief. I watched an amazing little thing by a disaster relief consultant who was suggesting there's 3 phases to any crisis. One is a kind of response phase. That's the emergency actions to sort out the immediate crisis. It's adrenaline fueled, yeah, so it can lead to burnout. And I feel that a bit within myself. I wonder how many other church leaders do that. Now it's getting, the energy levels within me are beginning to fall. I feel a bit more teary, a bit more easily overwhelmed. I didn't get an Easter holiday. I'm not saying like, oh, woe is me. There's many people who are suffering in ways that are unimaginable to me, but I can feel that within myself, having put a huge amount of energy into trying to lead in the response phase. Yeah. I can feel within myself now the weight and a burden of that as maybe the adrenaline phase begins to ease. The disaster relief consultants say there's a second phase that's about recovery. Yeah. And that might be 6 to 12 months, where there's a kind of a trauma, a grief, a loss of confidence in what was normal. You're dealing with the sort of mental health, social aftermath. There's a well-being and support required. And I think in that recovery phase, the church, just as you said, Rich, we're going to have to do a funny mix of celebrating being able to regather in some ways, for example, yeah, even if our larger Sunday gatherings will be one of the last things to be eased, yeah, which is what we're anticipating here. We'll have to do some celebrating, but also some lamenting, just as you said, Rich, some memorials of the deep suffering and loss and grief that's occurred, and the way it's revealed the mess we're in. Yeah. So that's going to be a different phase. And then after that, there's the sort of reconstruction. So response, recovery, reconstruction. In the new reality, I think there'll be a reset sense of values in some way. I hope we're gonna value our core relationships in a new way. I hope we're gonna value key workers, those who have been the sort of savior figures during the crisis. I think we'll value them in a new way that could be very exciting and very healthy for society. A greater concern for sort of justice and fairness, a desire to sort of bring back into society those who had become isolated and so on. I think all that could be a good thing. But the experts kind of say that during that recovery phase, trust becomes a scarce commodity. you know, so far, the blame game has largely been, it's been sort of flirted with by some politicians, perhaps.
Yeah.
But not really. But sooner or later, I expect that to kick in, and the recriminations could be pretty harsh. And I think that trust will become a very scarce commodity. And actually, it's my hope that I think this is where the church really could move forward, because I think on the whole, around the nation, as I see it, the church has really built up trust in the way that it's responded during this time. We're flawed, and it's not been without difficulty and cost, but I think on the whole that's occurred, which is great. I think that puts us in quite a good place when that reconstruction phase begins. So yeah, we're talking about, you know, the phrase using, Rich, is that the way in is not the way out.
Yeah.
So the way into the way we went into the lockdown, where we accelerated very quickly, through the measures that we had to take, we won't just like turn all those off and reverse back to normal. I think it will be a much slower development, and partly because we want, as I said earlier, we want to continue a lot of the things that we've put in place, and also we don't want to go back to behaving like how we behaved, because it's been a bit of a wake-up call for us as well. And I'm aware within myself of the challenge of leadership. You know, when you lead into a crisis, we've probably all switched into a bit of command and control, fast decision making, really narrowing the consultation and whatever, just to make very fast decisions. But I don't think that's the leadership approach that will serve well coming out of the crisis, and that sort of slower development of the church towards that new reality will need to be more considered, planned, adaptive, consultative, and blending those leadership approaches in a kind of situational way as the slower changing environment unfolds in ways that we can't quite foresee at the moment. So that's kind of what we're thinking about as a home church at the moment.
That is so good. That's gold. Genius. I knew it was good.
Well, I learned from the best, from you, Rich.
No, give me a break. Tim Matthews, thank you so very much for your time. We'll hopefully do this again at some point, but really helpful. Thank you.
I'd love that. Well, God bless Rich and you and your family and your church there. Keep going. And I think it'd be very interesting to have this call again in like a few months' time or next year, and think, I think we'll be looking back and think, wow, look at what God did.
I totally agree with you. Well, exactly. And blessings on you guys. Love to Debbie and your church, and Zoom soon. All right.